So, in this series, we're going to discuss things like what it means to be an artist, a creative, and/or a musician. Ways we can think about and frame how we learn and how we grow. Things like how we interact with the world and how we express ourselves to the world and how we receive feedback from the world. Lessons that we can learn from what life throws at us, and how we can think about things like our shortcomings or our failures. Just breathe. Just breathe. And how we can just continue to grow in our creative endeavors. The truth is, failure is an inevitable part of making an effort. Look at me with these videos right here. I know I'm probably not very good at them right now, but over time I'm going to learn what's working and what works for me. And I'm just going to get better and better as time goes on. Well, at least that's my hope. So if this is the kind of thing that you're into, I'd really love to hear from you. Give me some feedback. Let me know how I can do better, what I can improve on, and definitely leave me some comments about future ideas of discussions we can have. And leave me some comments down below about things that you've struggled with and what's your learning curve look like in your creative endeavors, in your music career or your artistic career. And let's have a discussion. So I think one of the first problems that we run into, or at least I know that I do, is that when we learn something new, whether it's a concept or an idea, a method or a technique for something, that a lot of times what we can do is really internalize it or intellectualize it, and we're not necessarily putting this thing into practice and seeing how it actually works in our application of it. We go from the intellectualizing of it and the internalizing of it, and we think that we can just go and run with the concept. We don't really practice the nuance of the new concept to understand it to its full potential. So it's in the application of a thing where the advancement actually occurs. Let's say you learn a new mixing techniques, for instance, something like parallel compression. There's probably more ways that you can mess it up than ways that you can get it right. And until we start practicing and weeding out all the different possibilities, it's hard to say what works for us. We can conceptualize the idea of how this new concept can be a good idea and think to ourselves, yeah, I'm gonna try that on my drum bus or on whatever. And until you actually start working through it and practicing a thing over and over again, you won't really understand the nuance of a thing. Because the thing is, when we practice something, it's not just our mind working through it. We have our mind and our body kind of working in unison, and your physical body's actually going to remember the things you're doing. Whether you're doing like a physical workout and you're learning something new there, or even an intellectual concept actual physical practicing of that thing helps us to internalize it in a whole different way. Kind of our muscle memory of our mind and our body working together will bring in more clarity. So there are many outcomes that are the potential result of the application of your learning. Until we start weeding out all the different results that are possible, we don't really know what to expect from our actions.
Damn!
Once we start practicing, doing these things with repetition,
repetition legitimizes.
We won't know really what the expected outcome should be once we continue to do these things over and over again.
Repetition legitimizes. Repetition legitimizes.
We can start to predict what the outcome may be and possibly at least narrow down what the results should or might look like. So I'd say it's been my experience that most things worth learning can be either complex or very layered and nuanced. Let's say you're learning melody writing with music. How it interacts with harmony can be very nuanced. There can be many different variables that can work and will work for you, but that there's certain types of combinations that work best for you. Let's see. Until you start working out the different concepts of writing melody, things like note spacing, their relative spacing to each other, and their tempo, things like, solid quarter note timing with 8-note accents and, triplets here and there and stuff like that. Until you start working through what works best for you in certain scenarios, you won't really know what works best for you. So while there are many things that can work, what works for you can be very nuanced. Okay, so I really like this thought. Failing at an aspect of a thing can bring about relevant questions that advances you to the next step of your learning. So let's say you completely fail at one point, possibly several times. You're learning, let's see, what could you be learning? Let's say you're learning modal interchange. Going from one key or mode of a key and in part of a song changing that mode, if you know what I'm talking about, and then back to the original key or mode. It could be very nuanced how this works out, and there's a million different ways to do it, but by doing it a few times and failing at it, it'll bring about relevant questions that make you ask yourself, why didn't this work? What am I doing that I could do better? What if I tried this instead? What if I thought of it like that? What if I just look at how somebody else has done it in the past and possibly write down some ideas of how they pulled it off? Things like that will bring about relevant questions that you can be asking yourself and applying to the concept. So I'm doing this thing right now as I record this where I turn the camera on before I really think through what I'm going to say. And I kind of like it because it's forcing me to just fire more quickly and kind of say what's on the top of my head. This next one is, as you grow in your understanding of a topic, you're going to find that there's more than one path to the win or to the success.
from and it really get messy. I don't trust people cause they really messy. I got it all out.
If you're a parent, you probably know this really well as you teach your children how to do anything. Or even if you're not, if you're never even thought about having kids, if you're a human, you've probably learned yourself that there's definitely more ways than one to do a thing. Whether you're doing something very basic like doing the dishes, or you're doing something complex like driving a car or an airplane, there's really more than one technique always that we can apply to doing a thing. And what's best is to figure out what things work for you and to stick with those things. So focus your energy on what works for you. There's this concept. It's called Pareto's Principle, or also known as the 80-20 rule. And if you haven't heard of this before, go look it up and see what I'm talking about. It applies to virtually every aspect of life. And what the 80-20 rule is talking about is that 80% of your effectiveness or your results are going to come from just 20% of your efforts. How you can apply this is that you'll find when you look at your own data, if you self-reflect on anything that you're learning, that you're making your biggest advancements from the small portion of things you're working on. So if you take that and you start concentrating on those things that are working for you, and then once you have that pulled off, that 20% of effectiveness, and you dig into that, you can almost 80-20 it again and really start to focus in on the techniques and the ideas and concepts that are really working for you. You can kind of cut the time really down really rapidly on how you're going to advance in a thing and achieve your mastery of it pretty rapidly. Okay, so there's also a second school of thought that I like to use a good bit. So taking the 80-20 rule, you're going to shift your focus when applying the 80-20 rule to the 20% of things that are most effective. In other words, you're going to, instead of only doing those effective things 20% of the time, you're going to attempt to do them most of the time so you can advance at them. So that school of thought is focusing on the things that are effective and the things that work. And my thought is to flip it and take your other 20% of your time that you're working on something and actually focus on the things that you're lacking on. Unless it's something that you can delegate to somebody else and just say, here, you take this and you deal with it for me and report back to me, and you're collaborating with someone in that kind of way. If you don't have that, actually really dig in that 20% of the time. Don't want you to overwhelm yourself with the things that you're weak on, but to focus on them enough where you make slow advancements in them and they don't end up being this thing that completely holds you back from understanding the whole concept as a whole. So, kind of in summary, failing or making mistakes is actually an opportunity for you to weed out things that aren't working or that don't work for you. And if you kind of shift your mindset on that and you see this as an opportunity to get closer to the end result, it's really not a fail at all. It's a win because you're making steps towards that goal. As long as you can keep, when you start running a concept, as long as you can keep the end result in mind and you work backwards from what the focus of that end result is, every step you make towards it is actually a huge success. And by continuing to learn from your mistakes, you're just going well beyond what the average person is going to do in life, because people get so insecure, I guess, about their failures and shortcomings that it doesn't feel good. We base too much of our personal identity and what we think our value is off of how much success we think we're having in a thing. So, or how good a thing feels. And it's not always the best idea. So if you can just flip that a little bit and you start seeing these small failures or big failures as a success because it's a learning process, then you're going to win every time. I appreciate y'all hanging out, and remember that life's short. Lost a couple people here lately, and I want to send blessings out to them and their family. And remember, life is short. Treat all your people really well. Y'all be blessed. Have a good one.